Hey, what's going on? My name's Vit, and in this video we're going to be talking about the new Arcadion Savage raid tier, the light heavyweight division matches 1 through 4. That's a bit of a mouthful, but the new raid tier. I've been super busy this past week and a half now, by the time this video comes out, progging these fights. I streamed the whole thing. I think it took me about 40 hours to clear the tier, start to finish. That includes, waiting around in Party Finder, looking for groups, everything. I'm just going based on how much time I put in on stream. But again, a lot of that was waiting for parties to fill, looking for parties, taking breaks in between, all that. But, 35 to 40 hours, which sounds like a really lot, but it's kind of like just playing a modern single-player game, About the same length of time, so it's, a lot of time progging, raiding, but we got it done. I somehow managed to clear on, I think it was like Sunday night, got the 4th fight done. But in this video, we're just going to be taking a look at all the fights. I've got, fight number 1 playing on the stream, or on screen right now, and I'm just going to talk over all the fights. These are my first clears. I've since gone in and done re-clears this week as well. We managed to get those done in only like 3.5 hours, so much different than the 40 hours it took me for week 1. But yeah, I don't know. I did it all in Party Finder. We did manage to kind of find a group by the end of things in fight number 4. We just kind of stuck together as a group and progged the whole fight, and then we even did our re-clears together, so we just kind of made some friends in PF. We weren't in voice at all. I think some of them might have been, but I was just talking to them through party chat. It was still very much Party Finder, but if you find some consistent people in Party Finder, you should invite them to like a link shell in-game, invite them to Discord, whatever, like make friends, because if you find consistent people to prog with, to re-clear with, it makes things a lot easier. Like, we got our re-clears done in 3.5 hours, week 2, and that's like while relearning the fights. So, yeah, I don't know. If you can find a good group of people in Party Finder, I highly recommend it, because it's been a pleasure playing with the group that we have been. But prog went a little differently because, again, that was only for Fight 4 and re-clears this week. Fight 1 actually only took me about 3 hours on day 1. I jumped straight into this fight and started making progress right away. We had some really iffy groups to start with. By that I mean we had people in there in their level 99 job gear with no materia, and I got out of those groups pretty quickly, and eventually we found this group that you're seeing on screen, and we got it done. They were much more consistent, and I had already learned probably half of the fight before finding these guys. But this was only, 2 hours into my prog. I started pretty late in the evening, like at dinner time, kind of, on the East Coast, so, it's not like I jumped in there first thing in the morning like a lot of the World First Raiders do. But, I was still able to get things done day 1. I got this fight done in about 3 hours before moving on to M2 immediately afterwards. But I don't know. I loved fight number 1. I have also gone in on Monday night, and I actually helped 2 other groups clear as well, just in Party Finder, doing like 1 chest re-clears. Not re-clears, re-clear for me, but doing their 1 chest Monday night clear, trying to get that last minute clear in, get their books. But I helped 2 groups do that, so I've cleared this fight like 4 times already, well, at the time of making this video. And I'm pretty confident in saying that I think it's my 2nd favorite fight in this tier. There's just a lot going on. It's a really fun first fight for a Savage raid tier, in my opinion. There's a lot of these like memory game mechanics where you just saw the boss do a mechanic and then it tethers to this clone, and then it kind of stores that mechanic for later. Like that clone is going to jump to the left and do that half room cleave left and right. We're also using some very early strats here. We're doing like boss relative. We're not doing same baits, if you're familiar with the Party Finder strats. this might look a little off to you, but again, this was day one. I kind of preferred how we did it here, honestly. I think a lot of people who clear these fights day one, week one, will always prefer the early strats just because it's how they learned it, and, you know, people get stuck in their ways. But I've done it both ways now. I've done this fight like with 3 different strats. I've done boss relative, I've done true north, I've done same baits, I've done not same baits, and if you even have any idea what I'm talking about, if you've done this fight yourself, it's a little bit to get used to each of the different strats, but I don't know. It doesn't really make things harder however you do it. It's just getting everybody on the same page. For me as a melee, it's kind of annoying doing same baits and true north because I just lose positionals a lot. If we're doing, you know, support and DPS bait differently like you're seeing right now, I can keep my positional spot longer. The boss got pulled away there, so it didn't really work out quite as well, but I end up having to use true north less as a melee, doing it this way, boss relative. But again, I've done it both ways. It still works. Doing it true north, I have to use true north. I know that's confusing. True north the spell, true north the strat. But yeah, both ways work. It's just whatever PF's doing. We'll see how it plays out over the next couple weeks, see what parties do. But you know, all the PF strats for this fight are pretty straightforward. They all kind of work. So as long as you know how the mechanics work, that's kind of the key takeaway for everything. You just have to know how the mechanics are supposed to be resolved, and no matter what strat you're using, if you're in, you know, the south or the north of the boss or whatever, boss relative or not, it still resolves the same way. Again, it takes a bit to get used to that change in positioning. I know that's a big roadblock for a lot of people. It used to be for me as well. But somehow I've gotten past that. This raid tier, I've been able to flip between Group 1, Group 2 with very little complaints on my end. In the past, that was always really difficult for me, but I don't know. Maybe I've just gotten more comfortable playing this game, improved as a player, and kind of gotten over that hurdle for myself. This Mouser 2, the second version of this mechanic at the end of the fight, is super fun. Doing this splintering nails mechanic where the DPS, tanks, and healers all have to bait separately while the other player is getting knocked to a safe tile. It just feels really cool to resolve. That's kind of the whole thing with this entire raid tier. Nothing is like so insanely difficult. M4 gets a little, quite a lot more difficult in my opinion, executionally, but everything's just really fun to execute and execute correctly. Like, all the mechanics are just super fun. I don't really know why that is. They're pretty similar to things we've seen in the past. This one with, you know, all the different floor mechanics, the floor breaking away, just having to spread in different ways. It's very dynamic, it's very unique. It's all the same mechanics we've seen, just executed in different ways, I think, but I don't know, this is just such a solid first fight. This is pretty much the last mechanic in the fight. We ended up skipping it week 1 for the most part. We were doing the tank invuln strat. It kind of got messy here at the end, but luckily we just killed the boss. I was helping some groups. It looked like we were gonna do it right somehow. I don't know exactly what was happening there, but we got through it. I was helping some other groups, and we definitely saw Enrage a whole bunch, even with no deaths. I know Party Finder right now, people progging this group, it's the Wild West out there. Like, people are struggling from what I've heard from our community. Party Finder's a mess right now. Luckily, I got it out of the way early. And I highly recommend you do the same moving forward. Doing this day 1 was very efficient and good, and I have no complaints, but I've heard from a lot of people that it's tough out there right now, so I don't know. I'm gonna have to clear my alt through all of this as well, so I'll probably get a taste of that. Less so on the prog, just I'll be joining clear and re-clear parties, but oh man, I feel for the people still progging this, because I know how it is in PF from what I've seen just from like the 2 groups that I was trying to help clear. We got it done though. It's a really fun fight. I don't know, there's not a whole lot to say about this one. It's just Really fun to execute. The music's great. Second favorite fight in the tier for me personally. Alright, moving right along, we're into M2. Honeybee Lovely. Man, this music drove me insane. This fight took me about 8 to 9 hours in Party Finder, start to finish. We got kind of walled on this one, it felt like. It felt like this should have only taken half the time that it did. But I think a lot of people are getting trapped in PF in this fight specifically. This fight is weirdly difficult, weirdly punishing. While you're progging it, it has a very tight DPS check because of the mechanic that when you get hit by the hearts, whenever you fill up your heart gauge a little later into the fight, whenever that happens to anybody, the boss heals by a good amount. And if she heals a few times, it makes the DPS check insanely tight. So it can be one of the most punishing fights in the entire raid tier, in my opinion. It leaves very little room for error. I actually died in my clear a bit later on. Luckily, it was at like a good time where it didn't really impact things. It wasn't during burst or anything, so we still managed to clear. Thankfully, I was so ready to be done with this fight by the time that I was clear ready. And I think I had been clear ready for quite a while. This fight also has a really interesting kind of like another memory game to it, where you have to remember if it's stack or spread for many of the mechanics when, you know, when you have to go out with your partner or you have to go in and like dodge the different mechanics. The stack and spread gets stored from like some of the starts of like some of the more difficult mechanics. You do a full mechanic and then that stack or spread comes back. I personally have a really hard time with, you know, trying to remember things while playing a DPS job with a busy rotation, trying to do my burst while dodging other mechanics, and then trying to remember, what was it again? Stack or spread? I don't know. Let me just stand here and hope for the best. Hopefully my partner knows what to do, or else I'm gonna die. Luckily for me on melee, my stack and spread spot is typically in the same spot, at least for the in pattern. When you have to go out, you can kind of use body language to tell. So I kind of cheat that one a little bit when I'm unsure. Here we have like the bullet hell mechanic from normal mode, which is surprisingly a lot more tame than in normal mode, because in normal, you also have all of the ground AoEs, like seemingly randomly spawning under everybody's feet, which makes it way more chaotic. So that's not quite as bad as it is in normal mode. That's not the worst mechanic in this fight by any means. This like center stage, outer stage combo that she's doing right now, that's a really fun one to dodge on melee. Like you can max melee it to keep full uptime a lot of the times. Sometimes when you have to go out to do the like intercardinal dodges, it gets a little tight. You might not need to like throw a ranged attack here and there, but what we're about to see is possibly the most toxic mechanic they have ever added. Not the tank busters, but what's coming up afterwards. It's something pheromones, alarm pheromones or something. Yeah, alarm pheromones, the ones where all the bees spawn around the edges, and this is the most chaotic mechanic that I have ever experienced. Throughout Prague, our different groups were like trying different strats. Again, we were doing a lot of day one Prague on this, so we were trying to figure out like what's actually best for this. Here you see I get pulled off the boss, I can't get in there safely. The tank like made a weird turn. I just had to take downtime, like I wasn't gonna risk it. You really have to respect this mechanic if it's not going smoothly. It went pretty well. I think a tank even took a damage down there. Got clipped by something and somehow survived, but that never goes well in Prague. That always gets people. That was probably the hardest part of this fight. Outside of like figuring out how to cleanly get through these heart mechanics without healing the boss as well. Yeah, it's just really easy to screw up. Again, we're using pretty early strats here. I think this is what PF does normally now. This is the brain dead strat where you just stack the stacks and somehow the damage lets you get away with it. A lot of the heart mechanics don't do too much damage. I'm kind of just standing in the middle here with the spread marker, but I had to keep uptime somehow. Yeah, that ended up being clean here. I completely forgot if it was stack spread, most likely. But I just go to my spot, and then my partner either stands on me or not, so it works out for melee. You can kind of get away with being lazy on that, but a lot of people in Party Finder were typing in party chat if it was stack or spread, which was super helpful. If you have the capacity to do that while playing, I play a melee DPS on controller, so like even if I set up like a macro for that, it would be really difficult for me to press that macro sometimes. A lot of the time I even just miss the cast bar. I'm awful with that mechanic. Seeing if it's stack or spread, but man, that was the hardest part for me, I think. But once we got past that, this next mechanic, I don't really know the names of things. Is this beat 3, I think? This one's pretty straightforward. You just kind of, when you get a marker, you go out and drop it. There is a priority for, you know, supports going north, DPS going south, or roughly those directions. But this one's pretty self-explanatory. Again, a lot of the mechanics are not difficult. This one's really fun to execute, though. You get some light party stacks at the end here, and yeah, that mechanic's pretty much resolved. But again, they're just fun to do. Like, this whole fight was just a blast. Nothing you've seen up until this part is, like, difficult at all. It's just, like, dodge the in or out, stack with your partner. There's nothing new there, but the way that it's presented is so fresh, and here you see, this is where I die. I just went ever so slightly too close to the middle, going for a positional there. I was well within the positional range, but I just stepped a little too close. That was the first time in like 9 hours that had ever happened to me. First time I had died to that. Maybe both groups were just in a little too close. Unfortunate for the clear, but hey, we still got it done. We were all playing well, so we could get away with a death. I think that was the only death we had. And I think we even had one stack of hearts on the boss, like one heal on the boss, so the DPS checks this raid tier are interesting because this fight can be really tough, the DPS check, if your group's making mistakes. But if you're really clean, which you're probably not going to be while you're progging, it's not so bad. But if you've got just a couple mistakes, it starts getting really tight really quick. And me doing this in Party Finder, like if I was doing it with a dedicated static, like if there was, you know, me as the melee, maybe if we had a Pictomancer, like we would be funneling gear to the highest damaging DPS players. But in Party Finder, I didn't win a single piece of gear all the way up until M4. So I was going into M4 with nothing but crafted gear. And a lot of the people on our team kind of were in the same boat. I think our white mage had a chest piece in M4. Our samurai might have had like boots or something. Like, I think we had a black mage with like maybe 2 pieces as well. But like the gear was less than you would have in a static, in my case at least. Like I had nothing, most of our party had nothing. We just got really unlucky with our gearing. So DPS checks were surprisingly not as free as everybody on the internet is saying they were. Again, that's just a week 1 Party Finder specific issue, and we just got unlucky. Like if we went in with a different party, maybe some other people would have had more gear. Again, we could have had a cleaner fight here, but even so, like we only had like 2 mistakes on this fight. Like we had 1 heart and 1 death, and like you can see the DPS check is fairly tight. I got the LB3 there. In the group before this one, I was actually doing an LB3 earlier into the fight, and then LB2ing at the end, and we were still struggling to meet the DPS check. Again, this all gets easier with gear, but like as the weeks go on, the DPS checks are only going to get easier and easier, and I think as people do these fights really cleanly, these fights will truly start dying very quickly. But when you hear all the week 1 raiders in hardcore statics saying that the DPS checks are the freest things they've ever seen, just go into Party Finder. I had an M1 clear where we had 0 deaths and we saw Enrage. So Take from that what you will, but, you know, it's not as free as everybody's making it out to be if people aren't playing perfectly, if you don't have, like, top of the line raiders in your group, if you've just got whatever randoms from Party Finder, it can get pretty tough, actually. So this fight, that was the case. M3 was similar as well. We'll get to that shortly, but I think we did that deathless, and we were like 2 GCDs from Enrage as well. We didn't play perfectly by any means. Nobody does on their first clear, but like, we didn't really have a lot of gear in that fight either, so I don't know. Take it with a grain of salt when people tell you the DPS checks are super easy this raid tier. Like, there is a lot of room if you're in an organized group that's geared well, you're all playing really well, you're all playing cleanly, there aren't many deaths. Like, these fights will die very quickly, don't get me wrong, but doing it in Party Finder is a very different experience. But M2, I think falls below M1 for me personally. I think it's growing on me. I think this fight's going to be easier as time goes on and people get used to it. Like, doing re-clears on M2 was pretty easy. I think easier than M1 for me. Like, once you learn this fight, you know it. Like, you're not, like, I think this fight is going to be more consistent than all of the other fights, just because the mechanics are pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And it just comes in time with that consistency of learning the mechanics, getting them down, and, you know, not getting hit by things. Alright, M3S, the Brute Bomber. This is a bit of an interesting one. So, where M2 we cleared in whatever it was, 8 or so hours on day 2. This one probably took about the same or less time even. This one might have taken me, I think, like 7 hours total. I'd have to double check the exact timing on that, but this one was not as bad to prog. I got this one done in a single day. We cleared this day 3 in Party Finder. Again, just with the random group. I still had no gear at this point. Like I was just saying, the DPS check ended up being kind of tough, even with no deaths in our group. By no means were we playing perfectly. Again, we were still learning the fight. But, you know, it's, I don't know how I feel about this fight. I'm kind of still on the fence. There's nothing inherently bad about it. I think it's just the most normal fight. It's just like par for the course. This is a Final Fantasy Savage boss. There's stacks, there's spreads, there's ins, there's outs. There's, you know, big cleaves. You go with your partners, or you spread. There's Proteans. There's a few interesting, unique mechanics when it comes to the bombs and, you know, the chain death match, chain death march, whatever it's called. This mechanic where you're getting knocked back to the different towers is pretty unique. This is a very fun mechanic. But I think this is still the weakest fight in the entire raid tier, in my opinion, personally. I don't know, I feel like it's just the most forgettable compared to the others. It is still a very fun fight. The first half of it is kind of slow, in my opinion. And I've had people ask me, comparing it to P7S, which was also a third fight in a raid tier. Also had a slow start, but P7S had a much slower ramp, where at the end it was an extremely steep ramp in difficulty, whereas this fight is much more gradual. It very slowly just builds and builds throughout the entire fight until the end, where things are getting a little more complicated throughout, but it's a much smoother progression throughout the fight. But when I was progging this fight early on, once you get to like the halfway point, it's a very slow start. The first half of this fight gets very old very quick, in my opinion. At least it did to me. That's not to say it's bad, but while progging it, while doing re-clears aren't as bad as long as you're not in there for too many pulls. But when you start seeing this first half of the fight over and over again, there's kind of a lot of downtime. There's a lot of healing checks, like that one you just saw with the Brutal Impact, I believe it's called. And then the Tank Busters right after it. I'm sure there's more going on for the healers, but for everybody else, we're kind of just standing here hitting the boss for like 30 seconds, it feels like. Whenever he does the doping draft, he's just standing there, not doing anything. There's not much going on right now. For this mechanic, a little tip, one thing that was annoying to me was that the tanks would always pull the boss to one side, but you can actually just stand under the boss, look at the one you're not chained to, and then just dodge right outside of the boss's hitbox, and you're fine. You don't really have to move at all. You don't have to move the boss. Obviously, you have to dodge to the safe spot afterwards, but to dodge those initial half-room cleaves, like, you literally just look at the one you're not chained to and step outside the hitbox. I wish during Prague our tanks would have figured that out, because they kept like going to the corner and pulling the boss away from where my safe spot was, so I couldn't hit the boss, and we were just having little issues like that. It was never that big of an issue. Like, I might miss, you know, half a GCD or something of downtime, but it was never really enough to warrant complaining about and bringing up, confusing everybody, trying to like teach them how to do the strat over party chat. But this mechanic with the bombs and the spreads, I think this is going to be one of the most difficult parts for Party Finder in this entire fight, because just agreeing on how you're doing the spreads can be a little confusing. So it might just take a pull or two to figure out exactly how you're doing that. Unfortunately, that's like halfway into the fight. So getting there, wiping, and then having to do it again is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. Party Finder and spreads are name a better duo, I guess. Killing each other with spreads and Party Finder. So there's nothing you can do about it. You can agree, we're doing this paste bin, and people will still kill you with the spread. Now this strat's interesting. Not the strat, the mechanic. Because Party Finder's come up, Party Finder found a way to way overcomplicate this one. In my opinion, you should just go to your clock spot and then find the tether that you need to take. But Party Finder's doing it a bunch of different ways where there's some complicated priority. For me as a melee, this is like a 40-second mechanic. I'm taking one of those south spots. I don't care what the priority is. I am taking one of the 3 south ones, and there's nothing you can do about it. Good luck trying to get me to move. Because if I'm missing positionals for 40 seconds, then I don't care what the strat is, it is a bad strat. So this is the one thing I complain about in Party Finder with this fight, with the strats. The prios typically work like you rotate starting north. I believe the current one is like ranged, melee ranged, and you take the fuses according to that prio for both DPS and supports if you have a long or short fuse. So it ends up that the melee are most likely somewhere around south, but like at the same time, if you just start roughly near your clock spots, like you can really, like you have time to adjust, let's be real, unless you're like one of the first to pop your fuse, but I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. So far, me chatting out the positional spots, forcing people to adjust for me, has worked. I'm not promoting that you do the same. You should always go by the advertised strats in PF based on what your group's doing. But, you know, I personally am going to favor the southern spots there, the southern 3 spots, because I got a lot of rear positionals there, and if I can get one of the flank and rear spots, one of the intercardinal spots there, then that's even all the better. So that mechanic's fun in PF, but everything else is pretty straightforward. This one's just kind of a combination of everything. Like I was mentioning before, it's kind of just everything ramping up. Here you're getting the chains as well as the bombs. It looks like a lot's going on, but you basically just have to take note of what you're chained to. Resolve the bombs first. There aren't any spreads here, so you just have to dodge the bombs. Remember what you're chained to, and then dodge the one that you're not chained to. So I just stand outside the hitbox here, and I'm chilling. And then you dodge to the safe spot. For this mechanic, I always just look at the floor and see where wasn't hit, and then you just go opposite. Makes it super easy, you don't even have to think about it. Yeah, there's not much else to say about this fight. The last mechanic would be Infernal Spin, I believe, which you'll see me screw up horribly, luckily. The dancer in our party saved us here. I think that's coming up in a little while. But I basically just went to their spot and they on-avanted across to my spot and clutched it out somehow. Saved our lives, both of ours. I would have killed them for sure. But again, it's a first clear. I did it clean this week. I had a good run. I've learned my lesson on that one. But yeah, I don't know. Re-clears for this fight went super smooth. This kill went pretty smooth. I like this fight, once you learn it, similar to M2, like once you learn it, you're pretty good. Like there is probably some confusion. Here's Infernal Spin where I screw up. You'll see me go to the dancer spot and see them dash away. But there can definitely be some confusion with, you know, the spread spots if you're doing things based on different strats or whatever. Here I should be over on the D marker, and for whatever reason I thought over here would be fun. It probably would have worked. We probably could have fit both of us over in this corner if we spread out to either edge, but they adjusted, they dashed across, and we all lived. So I don't know how we lived that one. I think a tank took a solo Protean on that one. We got lucky we didn't all die to a Protean on that as well. Those are supposed to be pairs, and we had 3 people in our pair, so that could have been bad if 2 of us got hit and just killed everybody on our corner, but hey, we got lucky. Sometimes that's what it takes in PF. And they screwed up, I screwed up. It's equal. And then here you just get the knockback towers once more, and it resolves with the boss doing the lariat outside the arena, cleaving half the room. So just gotta watch where you're getting knocked to. Again, this is a really fun fight to execute the mechanics. I think it's the most straightforward, like I was saying before. But again, it's really fun to do. It's not a bad fight by any means. It's like, it's my least favorite this tier, but it's still an excellent fight. I think it's just like the boss design and the music I'm not a huge fan of, which kind of knocks it down a little bit, a peg or two, compared to the other fights. But looking at it by itself, if you like the boss design, if you like the music, then by all means, like, this is an incredible fight, and I could see why a lot of people love this one. But for me personally, the other fights, this raid tier outshine it, I think. But I don't know, doing re-clears this week, I've got to spend more time in this fight. I cleared once, and then I think we two-shot it in re-clears. Like, we one-shot M2, we one-shot M1, we two-shot M3 with our ragtag party finder group that we've been doing some stuff with. And here you'll see, right after these raid wides, he's going into Enrage. So there's that out, there's an in, and then it's Enrage. So we had like 2 more GCDs before Enrage on that clear, and I don't think we had any deaths. We might have had a damage down or something. I don't even think that was the case. I think that was a clean run, and that was tight week 1. Like, people in that group I don't think had gear. There were definitely bigger issues. I think tech step was drifted like 15 seconds or something ridiculous. Like, I saw tech coming out when my burst was over at the end of that fight. So you know, there's always bigger problems than, you know, the gearing or, you know, a death, but it's Party Finder. It's what can you do? It's not an organized static. I won no loot here yet again, so I was going into M4 purely in crafted gear. I actually ended up going full pentamelded just to try to help out in the M4 check. I was kind of hoping that I would get lucky and at least get a single piece of loot leading into M4, but I literally got nothing. Like, I was still in my normal raid gear at this point, so I dumped like 8 million gil in materia to pentameld for M4 just to do that little bit extra. Okay, now we're into M4S, and unlike the past 3 raid tiers in Endwalker, this boss does not have a door boss, meaning there's no checkpoint at the halfway point for the second phase. It's all just one long fight. This fight's about 13 minutes long or something, which, you know, you definitely start to feel it during Prague. Because once you're getting to those last few mechanics and each pull is taking 12 5-ish minutes. You can only do like 4, maybe 5 pulls an hour if you're having good pulls, good consistent pulls. So prog definitely slows down. I think it took me like 15 plus hours, 15 to 18 hours. It's kind of hard to say exactly the timing because a lot of the time is spent waiting in Party Finder. Early in the week, like we were in this fight day 4, starting out at least, and you know, those parties were a little slow to fill, but so be it. So all that to say, I don't really know exactly the timing, but somewhere around 15 to 18 hours to get this one done over the course of like 3 days, I think. I ended up clearing this one on Sunday, week 1. And for reference, this is my first ever week 1 Savage tier that I've done. Previously, all of my raid groups have been very, very casual, raiding like just a couple nights a week, maybe like 3 hours a night max. For maybe like 3 nights a week or so, and it would take us months to get through the raid tiers, so I was shocked to clear this week 1, no pun intended with this boss. Shocked. That's awful. But this is just another fight where the mechanics are so much fun to execute. The difficulty is really ramped up in my opinion over M3, M2, M1. This fight's tough. It is executionally challenging. It requires full focus at all times. All of these mechanics need you paying attention to every single tell, every single cast bar. You need to be reading everything correctly, counting the different like lightning strikes that are happening. You have to like very quickly see the patterns on the floor, see what's happening. See if it's like close or far for the different tells on the boss for the one of the first mechanics, Witch Hunt. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this fight because a lot of these mechanics are quite involved. I'm not even going to try to explain them. I'm just going to talk about the general thoughts and feelings here. But man, I had so much fun progging this fight. I'm kind of sad that it was as short-lived as it was. And a lot of people are saying that this tier is short. They were surprised how quickly it got cleared, how fast the tier went by. And I kind of agree with that. Like, a lot of it comes to the fact that we did not have a door boss. There's no checkpoint in this fight, so there's no, like, hard second phase. Where in the previous raid tiers in Endwalker, all of the door bosses, I feel like the second phases were a bit more involved than this fight's second phase. Not to say this one's bad at all, there's a very different vibe that comes from having no checkpoint, and just a really hype second phase like this fight has. But it's a bit harder for them as the developers to commit to extremely difficult puzzly mechanics at the end of the phase 2 when there's no checkpoint, like in this fight. So if they had a bunch of like puzzle mechanics at the end of this, it would be a slog to get through this fight. So I think it's good how the way that it was done, where the second phase is just kind of like a nerve check. Make sure you're playing well, make sure you're paying attention. There's still a bit to prog. Like, the second phase in this is not free by any means. It is still challenging. I still struggle with it after doing 2 different clears. Reading some of the final mechanics is still tough for me. It's just kind of fast-paced, and if you slip up, then, you know, you are likely to wipe the party in the final moments. And on a 13-minute fight, it's starting to get to that ultimate length encounter. Not quite. I think like Uwu has, some clears in that time range, the 13-minute range. But for most people, I think it's slightly longer still. So it's not quite ultimate level length, but it's getting there. And you definitely do feel it, in my opinion. But speaking of ultimate, it's funny because in all of the downtime between the end of Endwalker, the last Savage raid tier, and Abasios, and this raid tier, I spent the entire time just progging ultimates. I did top, DSR, and then T, pretty much all back to back over the course of the downtime between the Savage raid tiers. And man, I felt like that really prepped me for this entire raid tier. Like, nothing in this raid tier felt like it was challenging, but none of it felt impossible. You know what I mean? Like, I saw how things worked. I was able to jump in there, and I think doing all those ultimates really made me improve as a player, where I was ready for this week 1 clear, where I might not have been if I hadn't done all those ultimates. I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but all that to say is Ultimate is a great training tool if you're, you know, used to just doing Savage. It really made me feel prepared coming into this raid tier, which was a unexpected experience for me because Savage has always been extremely difficult, and it was just nice to feel confident and really comfortable in these fights during Prog, in Party Finder especially. So we're just seeing transition there. We're going over to phase 2. Phase 1 is so much fun. I don't even care when we wipe on this fight because it's just fun doing phase 1 over and over. Like, there's never a slow part in this entire encounter. Like, all 13 minutes are action-packed. And phase 2 is a bit weird. She just kind of goes back to like her original Mikote Catgirl form, but she's like a giant mech for some reason. It's Dawn Trail. We don't question the details. Don't think too hard about it. It makes no sense why she's back to being a Catgirl after being like that Ixion-infused beast soul hybrid creature thing, whatever she was. So I'm not going to question why she's like Mecha Catgirl at this point, but I don't know. This phase is so hype. The music's hype. All the mechanics are so much fun to do. The pacing is honestly really good. I don't know. There's not much to say about this fight that, like, it's pretty straightforward, honestly, when you compare it to the last 2 final fights in Savage, like P8S, P12S. Like, this one's way more straightforward. There aren't really any puzzle mechanics. Like, it's just execution. Like, it's pure execution for the most part. It's reading things. There are a bit of memory games to this one, just like the previous fights in this raid tier. That's really a recurring theme, where the boss will stock these tail mechanics that are happening right now, either the knockback that you're seeing, or the fire, which just does a big AoE whenever the tail hits down. And you have to remember left or right throughout the course of like 2 different mechanics in this phase. This phase also just does a whole bunch of damage, and again, the DPS check is not too crazy in this one, but our party had no gear. we had a few pieces spread across us, but like, it was not optimized at all. Like, the melee didn't have much. Our caster had a couple pieces, but like, it was nowhere near as optimized as any static would be. But like I was saying earlier, this is the group that we kind of like formed a little bond with, our mini PF static, where like the 6 of us just progged this fight. Because honestly, week 1, like doing this fight in PF, it was easier just to stick with a group that was like relatively consistent. Like, we were all making mistakes. We were all still progging the fight. But like, it was better to put up with everybody learning the fight than it was trying to jump between different Party Finder groups, and you never know what you're gonna get. Like, we at least knew that the majority of our group was consistent, so we stuck together, and we eventually made it all the way to the end and got through it, which I think was a really important and good call. Which I would urge many of you to do if you're progging these fights in PF, any of them. Like, if you find some people who are good and consistent, you don't even necessarily need to like stick with them beyond that party, but like, if people are just making like honest dumb mistakes, like, don't just leave the party immediately. Try to stick it out, give them a chance, and like really like try to learn with them, because you got to be honest with yourself as well. Like, the odds are you're not playing perfectly either. Maybe you are, I don't know. But I know that I was not, and like I can't fault people for making mistakes when I'm still making some mistakes. So like a lot of the time in PF, when you're progging these fights, it's just worth riding it out. Obviously, you'll find those parties like I did on day one where people were in their level 99 job gear, and it's like, okay, I need to leave this party. Sometimes you have parties that are like that are so blatantly obvious that you need to go find a new party, but whenever there's like a glimmer of hope, sometimes it's worth riding it out for a little while. You don't necessarily need to stay the whole lockout, but try to give people a chance, because that's what I did in my prog across all of the different fights. I probably stayed in some groups longer than I should have, but it really let me practice and learn the fights as well. And the thing with Party Finder is, like, if you're spending more time sitting there looking at the PF listings, waiting for groups to fill, than you are actually in the fights, you're doing it wrong. Like, even if you're in a group that's making some mistakes, as long as you're in the fight, like, practicing yourself, improving yourself, I think you're making progress, even if you're not seeing as far into the fights that you would like to be. There's still a lot to be gleaned from that. So, I don't know, just a bit of advice from what I observed doing this myself. This is the mechanic that still gets me to this day. I don't know what it is about this one that trips me up, but there's so much going on here. You have to read where the towers are, you have to read if you have a long, short debuff. If you have a short debuff, you have to bait the laser cannons. You got to watch for this in-out cleave halfway through it. If you've got a long debuff, you've got to go bait the second set of cannons. All while remembering, did the boss stock left-right knockback, or right-left, or fire left-right, or fire right-left? There's so much to think about in this last final mechanic that, like, it is so easy to screw up that one, and that's at, like, whatever it is, the 11-12 minute mark. Man, the amount of times we wiped to that one. There's some interesting Party Finder strats out there as well for like uptime, and man, we are all just too scared to try it. It's not worth it. We had a death here even. The Black Mage died there right at the end, unfortunately. But we were playing pretty well, and we managed to clear this one. I think some of the healers might have not been, you know, they might have been playing a little safe, so healer damage could be improved a bit as well, but otherwise the rest of us were like super on the ball, I think. And again, I'll take safe healers for a clear by all means. I don't fault them for that. It's just saying, like, obviously there are improvements to be made. It's not just our lack of gear that's getting us fairly close to Enrage here. I don't think we even see the Enrage cast bar, so no, we still had a good bit of time there. But yeah, there's always improvements for everyone to be made. I'm not trying to single anybody out, but, you know, healers safety gaming at a final fight here is kind of to be expected. So, I don't know. There's, I don't really have any final thoughts. I've got to spend more time in these fights. It's just such a fun raid tier. This is Fight 4 was, Match 4 was far and above my favorite from the raid tier. This fight is so much fun start to finish. It feels so good getting it done, especially in PF. Again, this is my first time PFing a raid tier start to finish as well, which is a very satisfying experience if you've never done it. Because I was just having to figure everything out by myself, like finding guides, resources, finding all the paste bins. I was trying to like determine what all the strats were, what would work best, and, you know, how to play my job in all the fights. And, you know, I had a little bit of input from some friends, from some people in Twitch chat, about, like, you know, where to stand for some safe spots in this last fight. And, you know, that was kind of it, though. Like, the rest of it, I was pretty much on my own. I got super lucky here. I even won the music and the weapon. So losing the rolls on all of the gear up until this point, I guess that made up for it. I got the weapon, I got the music. I think that music was worth quite a lot at that time, but I popped it immediately. Got it playing in the FC house. Oh man, I love that song. But yeah, I don't know. Fun raids here. I'm going to be streaming more of it on Twitch. I'm going to be doing the re-clears every single week. And I'm currently going through the process of leveling my alt so that I can do even more raiding every single week. So be sure to join over on Discord if you're not a part of that yet, and be sure to follow on Twitch as well if you want to see some of that as well. So thank you for watching this video. I'll catch you guys next time, and hopefully I see you in Party Finder. Peace.